Hello, this is Julian with Coffee Reviews, and today we'll be reviewing the Felipe Luzon wash processed Ecuador from Anomalous Coffee Roasters. And there's the bag right there. And Anomalous, based out of Brooklyn, New York. And this coffee was a suggestion to us by Carl B. Like Coffee. So shout out to and thank you to Carl for the suggestion. This is Anomalous's first ever appearance on this channel. As they're a coffee roaster I had zero familiarity with going into this review. And a lot of people know that we've been eager to review as many of the Mejorado, Típica Mejorada coffees as we can, which has led us to reviewing the Felipe Luzon from both Regalia, as well as, say, earlier this year. So when I found out that there was another coffee roaster carrying the same coffee, it felt like the perfect opportunity to review a brand new coffee roaster, another Mejorado, Típica Mejorada coffee, as well as compare and contrast the same coffee from 3 different coffee roasters. So I'm looking forward to discussing this one, as this right here is day 38. And recipe we went with for this one was a 16:1 water to coffee ratio, brewed at 200 degrees Fahrenheit, about 93 degrees Celsius. And I like this one best through the Chemex, which indicates a more medium grind. Roast profile for this one is definitely the most developed of the 3 Felipe Luzon coffees we've reviewed. That's not to say that it's an overly developed coffee, but it definitely does skew a little bit more towards that light medium by most standards and metrics. And I think some might even consider this to be a little bit more developed on that scale as well. Even then, I think light medium for most people is the best way I could direct this coffee. So with that out of the way, let's go ahead and start discussing this coffee. Day 17, first impression, and that's the very first takeaway I had for this coffee, was that it definitely had a little bit more development than the other 2 Felipe Luzon coffees we've had. So one of the unique aspects to this one was that it was best right off brew, as that's when I was experiencing the most brown candied sweetness from this coffee. In the cool down, there was a little bit more of this defined stone fruit aspect and a lot of the classic robust South American characteristics, leading to an interesting start. Not quite what I was expecting, as there are a lot of fruit notes listed on this one. But we continue on to day 19 as I ran into the Chemex, and this time it did have much more of that brown candied sweetness. Can feel a slight bit of the citric qualities to the cup, as well as at this time it was a little bit more reminiscent of the Say version of this coffee. It did come out in a slightly unripened fruit manner, so a little bit of better day. Not necessarily the best, but we continue on to day 22. As we ran it through the April brewer, and this one was one of the better cups to this point, though the coffee feels like it's improving naturally with time. The cup does continue to remain a little bit more brown candy forward on the forefront, as there is some fruit depth in the back end, most distinctly thinking of the citric aspects. So this was another good day, and while the coffee hadn't necessarily exploded yet, there were some positives I was taking away from these early impressions, even if it still left me wondering a little bit what was to come. Day 25, up to temperatures with a bit more fine grind, and this one definitely did accentuate a lot of the roasty qualities. And in hindsight, this is one of those things where I should have maybe gone the other direction with this coffee, as it had a little bit more of those hidden fruit components as it did settle, but at this time it was a little bit more herbal and a little bit more of that fruit brightness to the cup, but I think it was just kind of marred by those more roasty qualities I was experiencing from it. So I didn't necessarily feel this was the best way to go with this coffee, but we tried the same adjustments with the Chemex. Once again, mixed feelings, as not only was it smoky, but it continued to leave a lasting smokiness to the cup. And I was kind of wondering if it was worth the trade-off, because these adjustments did yield a little bit more of the fruit-forward components. However, at the same time, the smokiness really was marring the overall impression of this cup. Listed citrus, stone fruit, and berry fruits all a little bit more pronounced on this day, as the citrus was the most pronounced characteristic, a little bit more on the forefront, a slight peach in the intermediary, but for the most part, just kind of a mixed result on this one. Day 30, struggling with this coffee a bit as it continues to feel slightly smoky, and this is something I had experienced with more time, was the smoky quality a little bit more present to the cup, as it was skewing in the direction of what I would describe as acidic roastiness, which wasn't necessarily a positive. It does open up slightly as it cools, as there was a fair bit of fruit acidity with some slight focus on the citrus. So still not necessarily great days, but here's finally where I was able to turn this coffee around. As on day 32, I said, hey, let's just give it a shot, lowered the temperatures, and then I was experiencing the best of this coffee, as there was a significant less amount of that smoky quality, which did allow for more clarity from the fruits. At this time, I was able to experience a lot more of that brown candied aspect in significant abundance, with a bit more of the citrus and peachy quality to the cup. Definitely the best day I had experienced, and a lot of the fruit components in it were a little bit more sweet in general. So I think just by eliminating some more of those kind of smoky qualities to this cup, it really allowed the fruit components in it to shine, as well as that brown candied aspect. As on day 35, I said, let's see if this was a fluke, but on day 35, the exact same recipe, and the cup really seemed to open up all around. Tons of brown candied sweetness, a lot more of the fruit sweetness. This coffee was very nice. It was very reminiscent of both of those coffees in certain senses, one being that brown candied aspect, but also a little bit more of the fruit components to it. So I felt like I'd finally found the perfect spot for this one, and it was really beginning to shine as I was really enjoying these last 2 days of this coffee. Here on day 38, same adjustments, a really nice coffee. So it just took a little bit of work to get it there, but once I got it there, I was really experiencing the best from what you would expect from this one. All right, let's go ahead and put up the tasting wheel so you can see what we were getting. All right, and we have 4 level 4s. So let's start with the cleanliness level 4. And truth be told, had it not taken so long for me to get these adjustments right, then that one would have probably finished at a level 3 because I think the smoky quality was taking away from it. In addition to that, there wasn't a whole lot of definition in those earlier days, as it was kind of like picking and choosing what sort of components I could experience in moderation from this coffee. But towards the end, given that there was a very clear and defined brown candied aspect to this one, I definitely think it did justify that level 4 mark. It definitely did clean up a little bit with some of the adjustments I had made. Finish, level 4. Yes, I don't think I have too much to say on that, but interestingly, it was that brown candied sweetness I was experiencing in the most abundance to it. There was some slight fruit brightness to the cup, but for the most part, that was the most distinct and dominant thing, especially towards the end. Sweetness, level 4. Yes, that's 3 for 3 on these Felipe Luzon coffees, all being level 4 in terms of that sweetness. And this one right here, while struggling with it earlier, this one was also going to be a level 3 until I finally got it to a point I liked it. It had significant sweetness to the cup, again, that brown candied sweetness, but I've loved that so much from these Mejorado coffees, and it's what sets them apart. I call it the great equalizer because it allows coffees that are roasted in the Loring to taste like coffees that are roasted in the Probat, and that's why I'm a really big fan of this variety, if I haven't said so as much previously. But this one having that level 4 mark was really nice, and then that leads into the other level 4, which is that caramel. And it's that brown candied sweetness that I continue to experience from these Mejorado coffees, and I enjoy it so much that that's a lot of the reason I continue to go back, and I'm not tired of it yet. I don't expect to get tired of it because it is one of my favorite flavor profiles in coffees, especially these South American coffees. So really happy with that there at that level 4. Now we have a bunch of level 3s, so let's go through those, and we will start with the acidity level 3. While this coffee at times did have a fair bit of brightness, I think the ending adjustments that we had, kind of keeping the temperatures low, may have slightly muted the overall brightness to the cup. Even then, acidity isn't an overly important factor for me, so I am more than happy with that being at that level 3 mark. I think that actually did kind of play well, especially in those later days, because it just balanced the cup out. Because as you can see here, none of the other components in terms of the flavors, the florality, or any of the fruit components go above a level 3, which, if anything, that's the slight issue I might have with this coffee, is I didn't get a huge abundance of the listed fruits that are on this bag. And I didn't necessarily expect that going into it, because that was the exact same result with the Say coffee, as that listed a bunch of fruit aspects that I didn't experience in significant abundance. These are all definitely more subtle, just in line with the florality as well. So having all of those things at a level 3 did give this coffee a little bit of depth and balance overall, but nothing really did kind of shine with the exception of that brown candied aspect. I think the only other thing that's really worth discussing in this tasting wheel is the body at level 2. I don't think that comes as a surprise, given that this one was brewed with the Chemex, and that's just kind of what you might expect, maybe a little bit less body than some of the other Felipe Luzon coffees. But for the most part, I actually really like the way that this tasting wheel looks. I think this is a pretty good representation of what I was able to get from this coffee towards the end. All right, so my overall thoughts and impressions of this coffee. I have noticed that while they all have the same sort of base to them, all 3 of these Felipe Luzon coffees, they've all come out a little bit different in general. This one, if anything, felt maybe the most stereotypical Mejorado coffee for me amongst those 3 of them, as it did have maybe the most defined brown candied aspect of those 3 coffees, as the one from Regalia seemed to skew a little bit more in that honeyed direction, which was a little interesting. And the Say one was also a little complicated too, and these 2 coffees reminded reminded me a little bit more of each other, but I think these were both roasted with Loring. I'm not entirely sure what Regalia uses as their coffee roaster. Nonetheless, I really enjoyed all three of these coffees. This one was maybe the most tricky of those three, and it may have taken the most work, but towards the end, I'm not entirely sure which one I necessarily liked the best. It's something that we might decide here sometime in the near future. The type of person I would suggest this coffee to, though, I feel like this one continues to remain in line with the type of person that is really enjoying these Mejorado Típica Mejorado coffees, as it continues to offer a lot of that brown candied sweetness. And I think maybe a slight bit more developed of a profile would kind of direct the type of person that would enjoy this one as well. As those other two are, by most standards, a pretty light coffee. This one right here, not necessarily quite as light. It did offer a little bit more of those Central American characteristics, some nice depth and complexity to it overall, especially with a little bit of work, a little bit of adjustment. But towards the end, I think if you can get this coffee to the same stage that I got it to, then I think a lot of people would really enjoy a lot of those bright, sweet, brown candied aspects to this one. I think for the most part, I'll leave this review at that. If you by chance had an opportunity to try this coffee, I'd love to know your thoughts and impressions of it as well. If you're enjoying the content, give this video a like, subscribe if you're not already subscribed. And this right here has been a review of the Felipe Luzon wash processed Ecuador from Anomalous Coffee Roasters. Thank you for watching.